your point, Carl, that it's a cartoon character that people have been dealing with for a long time. But for me, saying that is the same thing as the same mindset. Obviously, not as harmful, but the same mindset as Dustin Hoffman being like, "Well, why is the woman just coming forward now after all these years?" I mean, maybe it wasn't hurtful to us, but if it is hurtful to people, it's something you have to consider.
I mean, you can. I mean, the thing is I think people are going to find reasons to bully other people, whatever stereotype. It's like, the Irish don't get mad when you say you must drink a lot of beer because you're Irish. They choose not to be offended by that.
Yeah,
that's fair.
The stereotype is, but there's a lot of Irish people who don't drink at all.
Oh, really?
Yeah, really. I know. Shocking, isn't it?
Well, probably because they drank themselves into AA. That's why.
Yeah. That or their father beats the hell out of them, so they never want to take another drink. So,
speaking of people that can set themselves on fire,
their accent, it's okay. But
no, and speaking of people who can set themselves on fire to good effect, I think any Irish person would be up in flames in a second. But anyways. Yeah. We're going to get the big Irish protest.
See, there's certain stereotypes that people accept or don't accept, and I think that people. And the thing is that I get your point, Michael. That you have to consider the stereotype, but the stereotype existed before The Simpsons did, and so they make fun of everybody, and they play with stereotypes as part of their format for the storytelling, and so it's there's that consideration too, is like at what point, kind of like when we talked about several episodes ago about certain comedians won't even go on college campuses because everybody gets offended about everything. You can't make fun of certain cultural stereotypes or anything, and that's kind of, to me, the same sort of thing. You can choose to blame a stereotype or people choosing to put you in the corner, but everybody puts everybody in a corner.
Well, nobody puts baby in a corner.
Well,
nobody puts baby in a corner.
That's definitely a fair point. It's like, I guess my follow up to that question would be where do you draw the line in terms of stereotypes? Because I mean, there was a point in time, and I'm not saying that this is the same thing, but there was a point in time where minstrel shows were considered funny.
Right.
They're not.
Exactly.
I'm just kidding.
They're not. There goes all his Netflix cues, right? Guy like Shane.
I got the innocent Andy cue, yeah.
Netflix stream.
It's like, wow, my cue really does not know me.
Yeah. But that's true. At one point, to me, Apu is not that I've seen every episode, but he's not being depicted as stupid. He's not being depicted as disgusting. He's being depicted as a guy who comes in and runs a business and is a nice guy.
That's true, but the business is a quickie mart, though.
But it's reality almost.
Right, and they play with stereotypes. I mean, that's the stereotype. And the thing is that the reason why the Quickie Mart is so common is because it's one of a lot of franchises. That's the least expensive franchise to get into, to be a business owner, and so oftentimes that's the first. I knew a Vietnamese guy who was my lab partner in college, who was a doctor in Vietnam and had to start all over coming into the United States, leaving his family behind, and he also ran a 7-Eleven. So, because that was the easiest thing he could invest his money in and be able to run a business and support himself and his family at the same time, while he had to go through undergrad and go to medical school all over again in a language he was barely learning. So it's just sort of, it's not all stereotypes are wrong and not all stereotypes are negative. I mean, if
that's true. The character of Apu, I don't think it was ever meant to be a harmful thing.
Yeah.
I never saw it as such, but I'm not from India either. I'm a white guy from Boston. But yeah, I do see your point that on the other hand, I am Irish, and that's just one of the stereotypes that people.
So you're saying you're drunk right now, are you?
not right now with the way the show is going.
That's why you Ubered over, yeah. Okay, so, but yeah, no, I mean, there's a point where we got to decide not to be, super sensitive. But I mean, it's I don't know. I've gotten sort of like, personally, I've kind of gotten a little, I don't know, numb to all of this.
Yeah.
I've stopped caring about everybody getting upset so much.
And actually, the Simpsons response was interesting too, because there was a recent episode with Marge and Lisa, and Marge said something along the lines of something that was innocuous 30 years ago is now seen as politically incorrect. What do you do? And Lisa responded, "Don't have a cow." And so, like the Simpsons are like the writers are clearly not worried about it. Hank Azaria is. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what happens. It's a tough one. It's a fine line, I think.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah.
Well, did you have a point about Alice Cooper? Because I think that the I Feel Pretty and Jimmy Kimmel stuff kind of ties in with the comedy, but I don't want to completely leave that hanging. So if you want to finish your point about him.
Why don't we save... here we go. I'm going to have one line for Alice Cooper. Alice Cooper has actually been a Christian since the 1980s. He went back to being Christian. He's been faithful to his wife. He doesn't drink. He doesn't do drugs. He was chosen to play Herod for the Jesus Christ Superstar Live. He got rave reviews, and it doesn't surprise me. He's actually a very intellectual, grounded person, and he believes that, rock and roll is that art that it's a struggle, but he believes, he's always written songs. He says, even before I went back to church, he says, I always wrote songs about good and evil, and Satan owns the world. He says, we just have to struggle with that. Okay, there we go. We got the Alice Cooper down. Soundbite.
Well, by extension, as Kiss said, God gave rock and roll to you, so there you go.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, before we get to I Feel Pretty, because we want to talk about that at length, I noticed in GQ, as I mentioned, that Jimmy Kimmel had this interview, and a lot of it was centered around Jimmy in the past year or so has gotten a lot of attention he got really emotional talking about children's health care programs being lesser funded or defunded by the government under the current administrations and Congress. And he was talking about, knowing that his little infant baby boy was born with a heart defect and required, I believe, 2 surgeries already so far. And he was really emotional about, like, well, what happens if, it makes him think about all the kids that don't have insurance, don't have all these options. And he was getting really upset and advocating for people to, complain to Congress about these programs being cut. And he also went on a big emotional fit over the Vegas massacre by the gunman a couple months back, because Jimmy grew up in Vegas. And so this article is saying that not only is it very uncommon in American culture for distinctive men in entertainment to break down crying and own it, but it was even more unusual because he's one of these guys that's supposed to be the funny hipster, impervious to anything kind of personality, and then he's really using it in a way that advocates quite powerfully. And so I want to recommend this article. Look it up on GQ, people. Jimmy Kimmel is Seriously Funny is the name of the story online. But there's a couple things to look for. He deals a lot with the baby boy coming back from his second surgery, and he's holding him. The reporters there. The kid is at the show because Jimmy's married to the head writer, which is a whole thing that developed over many years. So it's not just an easy, hey, you're my wife, your head writer.
They didn't drop some Quaaludes and say, hey, guess what? We got married in Vegas.
That's Cosby, but
okay, got it. Good. I'm glad it didn't go that far. Okay.
But it shows, that how he talks a lot about how having a kid changes his view of life and God and all that stuff, and he keeps getting lost staring at his little baby throughout the interview. Just it's pretty powerful stuff, and it seems very sincere. And anyway, so he talks about this one thing about comedy I wanted to address. And the writer writes, I'm reminded of something else Jimmy had said when we were Ubering somewhere. Our driver was a bit of a wild card, the kind who might compel you to say a little prayer if you're the praying sort. And I asked Jimmy whether he regularly goes to church anymore. He said for him it was all about the sermon. He hadn't found anyone inspiring locally in L.A. I was wondering why people assume that comedians digging around in the dark corners of our id must all be atheists. He agreed and objected. I think that's complete nonsense. If you believe the Bible, Jesus' friend was a prostitute. I want to imagine that Jesus had a sense of humor. There had to be one disciple that everyone made fun of, Probably Judas. I don't think making a joke is unholy. I don't think curse words are against the teachings of the church. When you tell a joke, you're honoring people, telling them you know them, that you're paying attention to them, and that you have some understanding of who they are. It's a compliment because you're noticing them. I bristle at the notion that there's anything sinful about telling a joke or about certain subject matter. I feel like it's the opposite of that. So, I don't know if you guys have any thoughts about that.
Well, it reminds me of one of Pope John Paul II's letter to artists, April 1999, and he alludes to something similar. He says all art, whether it be craftsman, craftsman like you're a carpenter or you're a painter or you're a comedian or what have you, it's a reflection of God's joy in life, and it's a reflection. It's a way of expressing the relationship between humans and God, and it's like it's a holy thing to explore those talents. I mean, much like the people we've been talking about all day, using all day, all episode. It's been less than an hour, Tanya. So we've been talking about these people who are doing this work, as flawed as they may be. It's nice to see acknowledgement that these artists are doing something, good that reflects the goodness in mankind and the goodness in God. So, I mean, that makes sense to me. It just seems sort of obvious to me, but it's you don't hear it very often being expressed by celebrities or artists, etc.
Yeah. Any thoughts, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, I love that quote that he said, because when you find your calling is something that you're really good at and light that you can bring into the world, that's the whole point. That's a major part of why we're here, is to share our talents with others and inspire people with our talents. And I think Kimmel's a great example of that. And also whenever he's had to take a lot of time off to tend to his son who's had these surgeries, and it's been so hard on him and his wife and the little boy. What has happened is that other celebrities have stepped in and have taken turns being guest hosts for the night. And that to me is just, it's one of the great triumphs of the human spirit that so many people have been, especially people who you might not, I remember seeing Chris Pratt up there one night, and he was like, I am so nervous right now. Hosting a talk show isn't really like my skill set, I don't think, but I want to help Jimmy out. And just seeing, people go to bat for him like that. It's really cool to see.
Yeah. And, I think also that, it creates an interesting, discussion, I think, for us as comedians and in general, anybody that likes comedy, because giving a plug to something that we're all going to be involved with, or am involved with, I have a group called CatholicLaughs.com. We're starting to get shows like all over LA, and have talks going to get it all over the country. And, we go out of our way to have clean shows and say, oh, well, you can't joke about promiscuity or drugs or say, the obvious bad words. But it's but I see his point also. And even my priest friend who advises me said, I sent him a tape of me performing in Chicago in a club, and I had, just flat out, it was an R-rated set for sure. And but it got huge laughs, and I sent it to him just like, hey, what do you think? And he's like, depends on the context. He says, you're bringing joy to people. You wouldn't do that in a church, that particular set. But if you're going out in a club, I still talked about my faith as some of the jokes. And he was like, yeah, you know what? You're reaching people where they're at. That's, nothing wrong with that. So
I'm inclined to agree with that. Yeah. Because I mean, you might not do that set at a church or in the church meeting hall just based on the crowd, who the crowd is and what they like and what they react to. But I mean, in terms of your act in general, I think the greatest obscenity of all is censorship. I think you should, as long as there's a conscious point to what you're saying, you should be able to say whatever you want. I mean, it's really only offensive to me if you're going for low hanging fruit. But if you've really thought out what your jokes are and what you're trying to say, I say go